Council Lunch and Learn talks. It's great to see everyone here today. Our guest is going to be Mr. Salman Ansari. He is an entrepreneur and engineer. He co-founded a company called Involver that was purchased by Oracle in 2012, I believe, July 2012. He moved from San Francisco to New York to pursue other opportunities, primarily coding iOS and Ruby and Rails web design. So, without further ado, Mr. Ansari.
What's up, people? How's your lunch?
Good.
Tasting good? Well, I'm really excited to be here. You got the general gist of kind of my background, but contrary to what you might think, I'm going to spend most of today talking about sort of how I got into my startup, because I think there's a lot of valuable lessons that I took just about how you can figure out what's most important to you, how you can figure out what's most interesting to you, and how you can sort of navigate different work cultures, and a few lessons around that. So most of today will be kind of my story, my experiences, and things like that. And there's lots I could tell you about myself right away. But to start, I'm just going to answer the question that's probably already in your head. You're probably all just kind of wondering about me right now. And the answer is, no, I'm not related to Aziz Ansari, so I can't get you tickets. I'm not going to get you a special op-in. So just get that out of your head right now. I want to start today by putting out a simple truth, and that is that signals are everywhere. Okay, and what do I mean by that? Well, if you're walking down the street, you look at traffic lights, you see red, that means stop. You see green, that means go. If you look at a cat, maybe a large cat, just by the position of the cat and the rays behind, something's about to go down, right? Just from that. If it was a little lower, it would mean he's hanging out, having a good time. This guy's eyebrow is slightly lifted. He's judging you right now, right? So we're actually really good at looking at our environment, looking at objects that surround us, and just making assertions about them, like understanding really small cues that give us signals, right? But unfortunately, we're really bad about listening to our own signals. And so what I mean is, oftentimes, as you go about your day, as you go about your career, as you go about your life, every now and then you get these sort of innate signals. You get a feeling, like, hey, I don't think this is what I want to be doing, or hey, this is really what I want to be doing. I can't necessarily articulate it in a great way. I don't really know the full path of where I need to go, but I have this feeling, right? And I found that as I went through my career, the more I listened to those signals, the more I learned to pay attention to them, the greater success I had in happiness. So I want to just tell you a little bit about those experiences. Hopefully you learned something. If not, oh well. So it started in Oakville, Ontario, which is my high school in Canada. And when I was in high school, I was generally apathetic about most classes. I felt like I was doing okay in most things, but I didn't really know what it is that I wanted to do. I felt like I had a lot of different options. I could, maybe go into math, whatever that means, or science. And the other thing that was really stressful for me was that I lived in a house full of doctors. So my brother was a PhD in psychology, my sister is a dentist, my mother was a gynecologist, my father was a general physician. And I was like, hey, I like computers. Maybe, I don't know. And time was kind of running out, When you're in high school, you need to start figuring out what you're going to do in like grade 9, right? It's really early, I felt like, and I didn't have any sense of what I wanted to do. So I got kind of lucky where I just started to try out a couple of different electives, and I took this course, which is basically like software application development, and I didn't really know much about it. I knew I liked computer games, but I didn't know anything about computers specifically. I started getting into the course, and it was fine, and then one day I saw this. For those of you that don't know what it is, don't worry about it. This is a Fibonacci sequence implemented in code. And basically the Fibonacci sequence is a way to like generate numbers, and normally you have to like go through and do this by hand in a sort of iterative again and again and again way. This is a recursive function, which means that in order to generate it, it sort of calls itself. And my head kind of was just looking at this, and again, you don't really need to understand this. What you do need to understand is that I had a moment, right? I was looking at that, and I was just like, okay, that is what I want. Whatever's happening, however they were able to achieve, you know, the element of solution that concisely, that beautifully, we can write a few lines of code and create something. I knew I wanted to get into that. I knew it needed to be associated with that. So I know, and this was actually my last term of high school. So I figured out what I wanted to do like at the last possible second, and in a panic, just sort of applied to computer science. And luckily, I got into the school called University of Waterloo. If it looks like a bomb shelter, it really is. These are like tricks windows. They look like windows, but they're not even windows. It was like this, you know, very, very focused environment where we were kind of pushed really hard, but it was what I wanted to do, I thought. And the cool thing about it was when you got into this program, they had this internship thing. So like you can apply for internships in random places and hopefully, you know, get jobs, which is pretty cool. You know, I was excited about that. And so, unfortunately, this was in like 2002, 2003, which is right after the sort of tech crash. And so, you know, it was really, really difficult actually to get jobs of any kind in the tech space at that time. In particular, there was some stat, I don't remember it exactly, but normally they have like 90% of the students end up getting a job. Like that term, it was something like 40% of the students. And it was just like, just chaos. It was just people, there's just the process that they had where in order to apply for jobs, you would print out your resume and like some sort of cover letter, and then you figure out what job it is, and then you go into this building and you put it in a box for that job, like there'd be a number for that box. And I remember going there, and it was just like, just chaos. There was people with stacks of resumes, just like putting it in every single box, you know, and I was just like, man, this is a really, really tough time, and I ended up not getting a job at all. So that was kind of tough because it shows on your like little report card, you know, where you're supposed to say how you did in the term. So it would be something like, you know, good or very good, and mine was just like failed. It really says failed, which was pretty tough, you know, and especially because all my friends got jobs, so I was like the only one, and you know, I felt like, oh, now I'm behind. I don't know how I'm ever gonna catch up. Like, you know, even if I do catch up, then you know, I still have to play that game for the rest of my life, I felt like. But, you know, eventually I sort of realized that failure was a gift. It wasn't a realization where I woke up one day and I was like, failure is a gift, like, you know, but it came to me over time where, you know, I had to push myself to do things that I normally may not have done. So, you know, I volunteered at this, I got a job where I basically worked for free at this HR department of some random company. And, you know, my job was basically to build a website so that you can go to the website and like print out a quiz, basically like a survey for the department, and then everybody could fill out the survey and then give it to me, and then I collect the pieces of paper and figure out what people wrote and then put that back in the computer, which is such a mundane sort of like manual thing, right? And so I looked at that and I was like, oh, you know what, actually I could probably make this better. I don't actually know how, because I don't know anything yet, because I haven't had any work experience of any kind, but you know, there is the internet, so I started to Google around a little bit, and you know, I found this way to make a little like online quiz thing that people could go in and take the quiz and do it. So through that, I kind of was like, okay, at least I accomplished something in this and maybe learned some, you know, useful technology. And the next round of internships that I took, I ended up working at a canola research facility, which is a facility where basically it's like a farm-based factory, and so they research like the actual genetic composition of corn so that they can have like better crops and stuff like that. And I worked in the IT department, and so my job was, I don't know if you guys have ever seen those IT rooms where like there's a big server, like giant tall thing, and your job is basically like, hey, every day at 6 p.m. make sure you like take out the backup tape and put in the other backup tape, because only you are qualified to do that. And that was really the primary responsibility of my job. That was it. And I was just like, I mean, I know I have a job, but wow, like I'm not learning anything. This is rough. But that's when I sort of took the lesson that I had learned previously, where I was like, hey, maybe there's a way that I can improve this or what's working around me. And I started to actually just wander around. So I would just walk around, welcome guys, I would just walk around like the office and just observe, like what are people doing? And I walked into the office of the guy who's responsible for purchasing. And I was like, oh hey, so tell me about your day. Like tell me like what do you do on a given day? He's like, well, I'm responsible for all the purchasing for all the departments. And the way that we do that is I have this empty sheet, right? And it has a bunch of rows on it. And I pass the sheet around throughout the office throughout the day. And when people want things, like, oh, I want like test tubes or whatever it is that they need, they write them down on that piece of paper, and then he collects the piece of paper at the end of the day. And then at the end of the day, he gets on the phone and he says, oh, he calls all these different vendors and makes all the orders he needs to do, and then he files that away in a binder. And then I was like, oh, okay, well, probably got a lot of binders. And then I turn and look, and his office is just binders, just stacks of binders. And he's like, oh yeah, and he ended up stacking. He needed a chair to stand on so that he could put in today's binder. I was like, wow, okay, there's got to be a better way to do this, right? So, again, like this wasn't my job. I'm not supposed to be doing any of this, but I thought there could be some way to improve this, maybe. So I started looking in more into some of the technologies that I had learned about to have like an interactive web application where someone could come in and like select a thing to order, right, from a list. Right? It seems reasonable that they would want to do that, and over time that list would grow so that they don't always have to type the same things. And I ended up building like an actual like purchasing application that was an internal thing for the whole setup. And I learned that, okay, actually there's like opportunities everywhere. I just need to start like looking for them, even if I'm not necessarily assigned that, right? If I'm not necessarily tasked with that, it's up to me. I have the power to look around and just find things that I can improve. I actually looked up a really old email to find a screenshot of this. Look at how crappy that looks. But it worked, I mean, I thought about it and I was like, well, this isn't, the sexiest design that I've ever put together or anything like that, but it accomplished the goals, and I ended up building not just something for purchasing, but they have one for the greenhouse facilities and reports and all this stuff. This is actually a screenshot of a bug that the manager sent to me 5 years later and was like, hey, I tried to add a new section and it doesn't look right. What's the deal? I was like, you're still using this like 5 years later? Oh God, I should hire another intern or something? My God. But hey, I mean, if you do something and it works, they don't really see a reason to change it. So that was kind of a cool lesson for me. I ended up, building lots more stuff that was outside of the purview of my job, and I went back to school kind of excited, right? At least feeling like maybe I can accomplish some useful things in life. And eventually, I ended up taking this. This is near the end of my career, university career. I ended up taking this course in computer graphics, and they taught us a lot of really complex things about like ray tracing and other sort of tricky graphics projects. And there was this final project that they assigned us, and they did it in this really interesting way where they said, okay, well, you have to pick 10 sort of graphics technologies that you incorporate. You usually get these from like a PhD paper or something like that. And you can pick 10 really easy ones, right? And then your max score will be 60, like 60 out of 100. Or you can pick like harder ones, like 10 harder ones, and your max score will be 100, right? And so even though I was in school, like I felt like this is actually the same thing. This is another challenge where I could try and do something more, push myself, and like see what happens. So I took the sort of windy, annoying road where I, basically pushed myself to build this realistic simulation of a boat in water in like a world with land and mountains and stuff like that. And when my friends first heard about that, they were like, are you on crack? What is wrong with you? Don't do that. You're going to fail. And because if it doesn't work, like you get 0. There's no partial credit or anything like that. So it was a really risky thing to do. But there was a point in time, like pretty much 2 days before the deadline, I think, I was the only one left in the lab, and I still remember this moment where like I had just gotten the water to render, which is a very complicated thing to do. Simulating water is really, really difficult. And my boat was sitting there, and I wasn't touching it, but the boat was just kind of that. And I was just like, I have created life. This is it. This is the best I'm ever gonna do. Like, it doesn't get any better. And it's hard for me to really like articulate how serene it is to just look at water in and of itself, right? In some ways, even though it's a simulation, even though it's something that you programmed, I felt like I had created something which had its own existence, right? Which had its own momentum, which had its own really being. And that affected me in a personal, emotional way, where I was just like, this is incredible, right? This is what I want to do. I want to go and build games. I want to go and make these worlds. So obviously, I decided I need to go to Silicon Valley, which I didn't know anything about because I lived in Canada. And I was like, oh, that's that place where they do the tech stuff, and there's lots of people who do it. And I didn't really. I remember I was applying for my last internship, and there's like a way you can filter down the jobs, and my filter was anything that ends in CA, which basically means California. So like every job I could possibly get in that region I took. So I ended up getting this internship at this gaming company that I thought would be really exciting. It turned out that it wasn't really a gaming company. It was a company that whose purpose in life was to put ads into games every time you achieve anything, or when you're about to achieve anything, or between levels, or just for whenever, really. And it was my job to put the ads in there. So it was very difficult for me, and it felt like just a mess. And there was also like all this weird bureaucracy where like they kept taking funding from different people and like tricking. Bad things are happening there. I'm not gonna. Actually, I should name them because they're a horrible company. But I'm not going to. And it was another situation where I was like, God, this is worse than any of the previous jobs I had, actually, even though I thought this was a great opportunity. And so I was like, what can I do, again, that will help me create some sort of value, some sort of, improvement. And in this case, it ended up actually being meeting people. So I ended up meeting these two guys who, really smart, really good friends of mine. We would always go out together, go to movies, hang out. And one of them was a pretty senior person who wasn't my manager, but he was pretty senior. And there were some projects that he wanted to work on to really improve other parts of the company. I ended up working with him really closely and sort of created a little bit of awareness of myself, even though I was an intern in this weird big space. And those two guys that I met ended up being, we would basically talk about how horrible this company is. We would just, every lunch, we'd be like, this is the worst. Like, this is it, guys. And then we were like, well, okay, yeah, it's easy to say stuff like that. Like, what do we actually think a company should be like, right? And so we started to talk a lot about that, and those two ended up being the co-founders of Involver. Okay, so that's how I met them, and I ended up sort of, after I graduated, I joined them as a first engineer on the team, and we we built a lot of really interesting things, you know, in over a span of time, and there's so many lessons that I learned personally. But one of the biggest ones that I learned was that I invested in people, right? A lot of times people ask questions like, hey, like, you know, how did you come upon like the idea, or like how did it end up going, you know, to become, how did you know that was like the right idea to jump into, right? And the answer is you don't. Like, no one knows that. It's just a, you know, it's a gambling thing. You hope that it's the right time, maybe. But more importantly, when we started, so Involver's mission when we started was to use videos to distribute sort of like social campaigns. So we would get people to record videos, and then eventually we pivoted a lot and changed our mission over time. But the one thing that was constant was that I had good people around me, right? And that was a really key lesson for me, where it's like, hey, okay, in the future, wherever I'm going, whatever decisions I'm making, where I'm saying, you know, I'm putting my career like essentially in your hands as a founder and leader of these companies. You know, having good people around me that I can hang out with, that I can trust, that I feel like will help shepherd us even through difficult times was really important. We ended up being acquired by Oracle in 2012, and over this span of about 5 or 6 years that we had been working on this, my role had shifted a lot. And so I had started out as the boat guy, right? Basically like, I'm a coder, like that's what I do, I write code, that's cool. And you know, eventually as the company grew, you know, you always need people internally to take leadership positions. So I ended up, you know, moving into team lead, and then I moved into management. So for the last like 2 years of my company, to Involver's life before we were acquired, I was actually an engineering manager, right? So I would manage a team of like 10 or 12 or so. And you know, and as you can imagine, it's a very different position than actually doing software development yourself. And after we got acquired, there was a point where we had to give like a presentation about ourselves to introduce to, you know, all the other companies that were acquired, or to Oracle employees and things like that. And basically, I came in, and you know, I gave my little like demo with my boat, and I was like, yeah, I'm a builder. Yeah, that's what I do. Right? And then I went home, and there was this voice in my head that was kind of like, are you though? Like, really? Because what you do is you go to work every day and you manage people, right? You haven't actually like built things in a really long time. Like, you know, you just told everybody that the thing that makes you so happy, right, is building and creating, and yet you don't even do that. In fact, you haven't really done that for 2 years, right? And so that was kind of you know, a difficult realization for me, and I had to make some decisions like, okay, well, you know, shouldn't I? It's good to like move up or whatever, right? I should do that because everybody says like you should keep moving up, and you know, management or whatever will lead to other things, and that's what I should do. But the other half of me was like, well, no, but I don't care. Like I don't like it. I don't really like management that much. I think you know, I did a decent job at it, but I didn't enjoy it as much. I need to go backwards, right? I need to go back down to being you know, one of the software engineers, because that's what I want to do. And you know, I didn't figure out a way to decide it until this is kind of silly, but there was this like programming competition basically that was there, and I had been reputed in my team, at least initially, on being one of the better programmers, and I participated in that competition. And basically, to participate in the competition, you have to submit a bunch of code as like the initial submission, and then you actually participate. They looked at the submission, they're like, no. I was like, ow. Like, okay, like that's harsh. What is happening right now? And I went through this whole like emotional distress. Lots of ice cream was consumed, you know, like it was tough, you know. And I was like, wow, it's been so long. And the reason it was difficult was because you have to solve this particularly difficult algorithmic problem, and you have like 8 minutes to do it. And when you're pressed for time, you can't think about things. It's just instinct, right? And so I realized like, oh, that's what I've lost. Like you can still know things, but you know, your instincts are things that you develop because you do them day to day, and it's almost like, you know, like driving manual, right? It's just, yeah, clutch, whatever, I do. So I had kind of lost those, and that was pretty difficult for me to accept. And I was like, no, that's that's really important, right? That's what got me here. That's what I value most in life. I need to do this. So after that, I like walked in. I was like, that's it. Like, I'm moving out of management. You got to find a replacement. I'm going back to being, you know, a software engineer. And over like six months, let's say, or 8 months, or however long it took, you know, eventually I sort of started to get back my foo, as you like it, and I was like, yeah, I got this now. Like, you know, I've got it back. I'm like contributing open source, things like that. And I ended up switching from doing web development to doing iOS development, which is really interesting in a different world, and I could talk about that for ages. But I did want to tell a quick story that happened very recently, like literally kind of a week ago. I jumped onto this thing called Startup Bus. How many of you have heard of Startup Bus? Yeah, cool, a couple of people. It's basically this insane thing where 30 people who are like interviewed or selected or whatever, get onto a bus and then basically pitch ideas for what would be cool products or businesses to build. And then you form groups, and then you start building products over 3 days as the bus drives to Texas. So you have to like build it on the bus. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. You stop like briefly on the way, but basically you have 3 days to like build a company. And then in San Antonio, they like you basically pitch your product, and there's finals. There's buses that come from Seattle, San Francisco, Mexico, Canada, like all kinds of things. So the quick story I wanted to tell was that, you know, this was a really cool experience. We ended up getting to the finals with this iOS app that we built, which is really cool. Maybe I'll show it to you guys later if you have time. But there was a point where I came into it and I was like, you know, like, I've sort of done the startup, I've been in a startup, so I don't need to like be the business person or anything like that. What I want to do is just code, right? Because like that's I need to keep working on my food, you know? So I was just like, I'm just going to be heads down and just do coding and not worry about what the rest of my team is doing, because, you know, that's what I want to do, that's what I like. And so like 2 days in, we had basically, 2 out of 3 days in, we had basically like finished the app. And I had, you know, I had this moment where I was talking to one of my other developer peers who was on the team, and I was like, hey, do you think they have like the, you know, the business plan like figured out? Do you think they have like a pitch figured out? He's like, I don't know, whatever. I was like, okay, yeah, whatever. And you know, yeah, and then I just kept coding, and I woke up the next day, and the people who run the bus were like, hey, so we just wanted to tell all you guys, like, this is a very competitive thing, and the pitches and the business plans are really important, and all of your pitches are terrible, right? And I was like, oh, okay. And I realized that what I had said was like, yeah, this thing that's over here, like, that's not my job, you know? And that's not my job. I realized not only was that something I said, but it reminded me of a time in my startup when I would say stuff like that, you know? It's like, oh, my job is to do this thing, because that's my responsibility, that's what my manager told me to do, I don't have to worry about anything else, right? But the funny thing about doing that is, at the end of the day, the shit still doesn't get done, right? And the only thing that suffers is your company, and you suffer. Life doesn't have like a report card where it's like, aha, I told you, you didn't do his part, we win now, right? No, you know, you still suffer, and I realized our startup our little company was still going to suffer if I didn't go and assist with some of the business plan stuff based on my experience and all that. So I ended up like stopping coding and just going in and helping with the business plan, helping with the pitch, and we ended up getting to the finals, which was really cool. So I felt like that was a really cool lesson for me to reiterate. It's like, dude, just stop, make sure you don't say that. Make sure you remember, you know, why it is you're able to navigate everything you navigated so far. It's because, you know, you kind of go in and you look at opportunities that surround you. You look for areas where you can do things outside of your specific task. And even if you're really happy and content and good, if you are capable of doing other things, it's your responsibility to do it. Like, it's your obligation to do it. And a lot of you guys are doing really interesting things, switching into fields that a lot of people just don't have the capability to even take on, right? Even if they had the opportunity, right? Opportunity is one, and like drive and capability is another. By the way, I was told you guys all have exams right now. I'm really impressed you're all here. That's really cool. If I had exams, I'd be like, no, I don't have to test this. So thanks for coming out. But that was a critical lesson where I reminded myself of that. So a couple of keys that I want to just take away from what we talked about today. The first one is, look for those hidden opportunities. A lot of times when you look at an environment, if you're like when I was being the tape backup guy, when I looked around and I was able to find, hey, maybe I can improve purchasing. Or, when I was working in HR, I was like, hey, maybe I can improve quizzes. Or if you're in a team and you just have those other talents, like, hey, maybe I can improve those. So even if your career is evolving towards technology, like, you remember that you're coming from really interesting backgrounds as well. And those are always going to have applications and uses in different environments. Some of the people who have just been doing tech since day one, they actually don't have any of those. And that's why I had to step in one case, because it's like people tend to just do one thing. And it's kind of awesome when you have multiple backgrounds, because you're like, hey, I can do this, I can switch to this mode, I can switch to that mode. It's so powerful, and a lot of people underestimate it. So don't underestimate it, don't underestimate yourself, and make sure that you just push yourself to try and tackle all those opportunities. In the absolute worst case, you tried and didn't help, and then you go back to what you were doing. That's the worst case, which is not a bad case at all. There was a sort of a quote from a really good mentor of mine who once told me, like, your manager isn't going to be the one that manages your career, right? It's just you. There's really no one else. Like, if you want to see change, if you want to go and manipulate your path, you're going to do it. And I feel like I'm preaching to the choir because you guys are all taking action doing that, which is awesome. Second thing I would say is cherish those moments. So the boat floating in water moments for me, like, I think it's probably worth mentioning. I never thought in my wildest dreams that while I was in school, I would one day be, in the Bronx, giving a talk talking about a school project, right? It's school. School's lame. Who talks about school? It's annoying, right? No one wants to go to school. But it's something that I remember to this day. I still talk about it. That's how important it is, and it's because those moments are where you feel inspiration, where you feel direction, and you feel this wind that pushes you in a direction. And you have to remember those, because even if the current phase is not exactly where you're going, everything is just a push in a different direction, right? That helps you come slightly closer. There's no like destination to your career. It's just moving in different directions, and it's fun to remember those and cherish those, so that you can remind yourself that, hey, I'm going to experience that moment again, right? I can and I will, and I just need to push myself or wander around until I do. And that's kind of exciting. I don't know about you guys, but I think that's really exciting. Use failure as a driving force. So just accept and acknowledge that you will fail again and again and again, because we all do, and it's okay. And when you take that and you make it into an asset, then you're more powerful than people who didn't fail, actually. I can tell you that when I look back at our startup, we screwed up so many things over the 5 years. So many things. And I actually had the opportunity to chat with some of my friends who worked in a similar startup that was way more successful than us. Like 10 times more in terms of the acquisition price. Like they killed it, right? And I would speak to some of these guys, and they really didn't learn that much, because they would work on stuff, like this particular engineer would work on stuff, and there wasn't that much pressure because they weren't going to run out of money, and things worked well, and then they got apart, right? In our case, it was like, okay, like we're out of money, oh, the board wants to kick out our CEO, oh, like our product, no one wants to use this product, everyone hates this product, oh god, we worked on this for 2 years, no one gives a shit about it. Like, all these are good lessons, because you screw up and then you learn and then you push yourself. Like, I actually think because I failed my first internship, I was a better intern than most of my peers for the rest of that career, for the rest of university. Because I was like, oh, I got something to prove. I gotta push myself. Versus everyone was like, I got the Google internship. I'm pretty set, right? And so afterwards, like, a lot of my friends ended up working at Google. A lot of my friends ended up working at Microsoft, and I didn't. But you could compare like how much people have learned and how much people have pushed themselves. Invest in people. This was just sort of a footnote as part of my talk, but I can't stress that enough. Like, when you find those people, these are people that you can work with for the rest of your life. you can absolutely guarantee that the people that I co-founded a company with, like, I will work with them again, right? This isn't just a one-time thing, and sometimes you come into a situation and you're like, yeah, like the management is terrible. Like, you know, in my first gaming company, the management there was terrible, right? Everyone around me just, I was like, oh god, but there was one dude over there, right? And I can tell you another story about how I met him. It was kind of funny, but you know, there was one dude who I was like, oh, you know what? Maybe I'll hang out with this guy and see what he's about. And he ended up being like my best friend for life. He's gonna be, you know, he's gonna be giving a talk at my wedding later. Like, you know, these are people who you need to find. So look for them, because it's not just looking for opportunities to do things. It's look for those people. They will help you, and then latch onto those. And the last thing I would say is, you know, whatever it is that you've learned, make sure that you share it in some mechanism, right? It's not just about like giving a talk or publishing, but you know, you could write about it online. You could talk to your friends about it. You could share it with other peers. And what that does is it forces you to reflect. And reflection is a really, really critical part of the learning process. Like, a lot of these things that I say, like the moments and things like that, those pivotal moments, I didn't really realize those until I was forced to look back and think about those, right? So that I can articulate them and say, like, oh, this is the path, this is what happened, this is what I learned, that kind of thing. And just by doing that, just by thinking about what happened, I learned more from it. And I feel like that applies to lots of things, not just in terms of experiences, but also technology. So the more you learn about technology, make sure you share what you learn, because there's other people who are not going to have the same knowledge you do. And when you share with others, like I have the privilege of teaching in General Assembly, and I can tell you, there's a lot of times where I don't even know what I'm about to teach, but I learn it in order to teach it, and then by teaching it, I now know it. You know, it's like, aha, I tricked you. But you know, it's a cool thing. It's a powerful thing, and something that you should all kind of try and do more. And the last thing is to listen to yourself. So to kind of wrap up, those were those signals that I was telling you about. You know, those gut feelings, those sort of moments of inspiration where you're like, no, I don't know, there's something off about this. Like, I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is. Like, listen to those, think about those, try and understand why it is that you're uncomfortable. Try and understand where you might be more comfortable. Try and understand what it is that you could change that could help you, because those are the most valuable lessons. Like, no one knows you better than you, right? And that's the sound of you trying to talk to yourself, right? It's like, hey, come on, you gotta move, you gotta do this, you gotta do that. It's like, normally we just ignore it, and we ask our friends, hey, what do you think I should do? Hey, do you think that I should move up? Hey, do you think I should take this job at Google? Of course you should. Like, it's a great position, you know? But, you know, you gotta listen to yourself and give yourself as much prominence, I would say, if not more prominence, than any other voice you listen to. Like, people are smart, but you're you, and happiness is the most important thing, so optimize for that. And that's it. Thanks. Questions? Yes?
You mentioned that upon reflection that looking back at your jump from the gaming company to Involver was fantastic for you. But at the time, how did you kind of deal with the uncertainty of going from a definite job to, oh my God, we're going to be under in 6 months?
It's a really good question. You know, when I was thinking about what I wanted to do, there were definitely a lot of standard paths that I could have picked. Mm-hmm. And the reality is, when my co-founders pitched me the idea for the company, I didn't understand it at all. It was like, we're going to do videos on Facebook, and it's gonna spread like mad, and it's gonna be great, right? And I was just like, I don't. This was in 2006, so I just didn't get it. And I had to trust my gut that the people who I was working with were smart enough to understand that this is a valuable path to pursue. One of my co-founders had actually started a couple of companies before. The other one had a lot more experience than me. And in that situation, I literally looked at it and I was like, I'm not even experienced enough to know whether this is a good thing or not. So I'm going to rely on the most trustworthy source that I have, right? And a lot of people think that reputable companies, big companies, that's trustworthy, right? Because it's proven company, so I can trust them, you know, to give me a good job. The reality is you're trusting them to give themselves more success and have you facilitate that. basically, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have personal success. And it really varies depending on your financial situation. Like at that time, I was, I was a single kid, graduating out of college, and I really didn't have that much to lose. We would pay ourselves literally the absolute minimum that we needed so we could pay rent and eat at Chipotle pretty much every day. And we did that for like 2 to 3 years. But I mean, that was our whole life. I had no other commitments, right? So I have to say that was a unique time in my life where like now, I'm engaged, like I can't really do depending on the situation. So I think if you have the capability of doing that, like sure, push yourself in, but always assess the risks. Like, can I afford this risk? Or maybe should I, instead of joining a startup like right at the bat, wait for it to have some relative level of stability and income so that I don't feel like I'm jumping into it. But regardless of what you do, make sure that the role that you're going to have is something that you want to do, right? Like I came in and I was like, I would like to code. That is it. You will ask me of nothing else, right? And they're like, fine. But I watched and I would sort of hover and observe what was happening around me and learned over time. But it's a tough decision. Nothing makes it easy. And if I was in that situation again, it would still be a tough decision because I wouldn't know. But sometimes, yes.
What's an example of common advice for success that you think is dead wrong? Or do you think anyone who gives advice is always right?
No, I don't think that's the case. I mean, a lot of the common advice that I hear is that career progression is important. That if by the time you're at X age range, you're not in a more senior position than you were when you were in a lower age range. Like some people look at someone who is an engineer when they're 25, still an engineer when they're 35, still an engineer when they're 45, as someone who has no ambition, and as someone who isn't really pushing themselves very hard. And I think that's kind of silly. I think that a lot of people don't have the ability and the maturity to assess themselves and what's important for them, and just pursue that. And at the end of the day, people just do what peer pressure forces them to do a lot of times. That's one thing I'd say.
So you're saying don't worry about career progression templates.
I would definitely say that. I would say the best career progression is to optimize for your happiness at any given point, right? So if I want to do if I'm at every point in my career doing the thing that's making me happy, I am winning at career. Career was a board game. I'm winning it, right? But it's tough because sometimes that doesn't doesn't show well and doesn't present well. That's one thing I would say. Yes.
How did you get your initial investors?
How did we get our initial investors for our company? So, people. So one of our co-founders had a really good friend who ended up basically being the angel investor for that. So in terms of investments, angel investors are people who give a little bit of money, typically in the 100,000s early, and then they don't ask for actual too much stake in the company, versus VCs, venture capitalists. They put in amounts in the millions and they want huge stake in the company. So it's usually nice to get angel investors early and stick with them. We actually managed to stick with our angels for 3 years, which is it's pretty rare. And it's because, like I said, we were all just single idiots who had nothing else to do. And it's fine. Most people have normal lives and commitments and that kind of stuff. But it was a connection thing. Yes.
What do you think of